Hi everyone, and welcome back. If this message finds you at the right moment, take a deep breath and just settle in with me for a little while. There is something about this energy that feels incredibly emotional. Not loud, not dramatic, just heavy in the heart. Okay? Because somebody is realizing that your absence feels very different from what they expected. For a long time, this person carried an assumption. They thought you would always be there. They thought no matter how much distance appeared between the two of you, somehow the connection would remain available whenever they were ready to reach for it. And honestly, that assumption became part of their comfort zone. The strange thing is, they weren't necessarily trying to hurt you. For many of you, this person simply became accustomed to your energy. They became accustomed to your attention, your patience, your understanding. They got used to knowing that somewhere out there, Aries still cared. But something changed. You stopped chasing. You stopped trying to force understanding. You stopped carrying the entire emotional weight of the connection. And when that happened, the silence became much louder than they ever imagined. The first card that catches my attention here is the Emperor. What's interesting is that when I look at this card, I don't immediately think of control. I think about somebody who believed they had more time than they actually did. Somebody who felt secure enough to delay difficult conversations. Somebody who convinced themselves that everything would remain exactly where they left it. But life doesn't always work that way. People grow, people heal, people redirect their energy. And that's exactly what feels different now. While they were busy assuming the connection would wait, you started focusing on yourself. You started reclaiming parts of your life that may have been neglected for a long time. Little by little, your energy began shifting away from them. And they felt it. Maybe they couldn't explain it logically. Maybe they tried to ignore it. But they felt it. The Six of Cups keeps pulling me deeper into this story because this person seems to be living inside memories lately. Certain songs, certain places, random conversations. The smallest things seem to trigger reminders of you. Honestly, it's almost frustrating for them because every time they think they're moving on, something happens that brings your energy back into the room. They'll hear a phrase you used to say. They'll drive past a familiar location. They'll remember a conversation they haven't thought about in months. And suddenly they're right back there again, thinking about you, missing you, wondering what you're doing, wondering if you've truly moved forward. The moon appears next, and this is where things become complicated emotionally, because this person isn't expressing everything they're feeling, not even close. A lot of what they're experiencing stays hidden beneath the surface. On the outside, they may appear fine, busy, distracted, unbothered, but internally, there's a completely different story unfolding. There are moments where they question themselves, moments where they replay old choices, moments where they wonder whether pride created a distance that never needed to exist in the first place. Yeah, that's what keeps standing out here. The distance. Because the distance feels less like something that naturally happened and more like something that slowly grew while nobody addressed what truly mattered. And now that distance feels real. Now it feels measurable. Now it feels uncomfortable. The star sits quietly beside all of this energy. And every time I look at it, I get the feeling that this person keeps searching for something familiar. Not because they're unhappy with everything around them, but because nobody carries your energy. Nobody feels like you. Nobody creates the same emotional response. Nobody leaves the same imprint, and that's becoming impossible for them to ignore. Oh my God! Some of them are only now realizing how much of their emotional world was connected to your presence. Not because you completed them, not because they depended on you, but because your energy became woven into their everyday life in ways they never fully appreciated. And the more they recognize that, the harder it becomes to pretend they don't miss you. Because underneath all of this reflection, something deeper is beginning to surface. Something they may have been avoiding for a very long time. And as these feelings continue rising to the surface, the questions they're asking themselves are becoming much harder to escape. Some of the energy sitting here feels exhausted. Not because the feelings aren't there, but because carrying them has become heavier than this person expected. There is a difference between missing someone and allowing yourself to fully acknowledge why you miss them. That second part is where things become uncomfortable. The Nine of Swords keeps drawing my attention because there are moments when this person is alone with their thoughts and there is nowhere left to run. No distractions, no conversations, no noise, just themselves. And honestly, that's where the struggle begins. Because when everything gets quiet, they start replaying situations they thought they had already moved past. Small choices, missed opportunities, conversations they avoided, feelings they pushed aside. Yeah, those memories seem different when viewed from a distance. What once felt like a reasonable decision suddenly feels much more complicated. What once felt like self-protection starts looking a lot like fear. And that's something this person is wrestling with. Not necessarily because they want to admit it, but because the truth keeps surfacing whether they're ready for it or not. The Two of Swords appears here almost like a mirror. Every time I look at this card, I feel somebody standing in the middle of a crossroads they never expected to reach. Part of them wants to move closer. Part of them wants to stay where it's safe. Part of them wants answers. Part of them is terrified of what those answers might reveal. There is so much hesitation attached to this energy. Not because the feelings are weak. If anything, the feelings seem stronger than ever. The hesitation comes from vulnerability, the possibility of being seen, the possibility of being rejected, the possibility of discovering that too much time has passed. And when somebody spends enough time worrying about possibilities, they often remain frozen exactly where they are. That's what feels so significant here. This isn't somebody who lacks emotion. This is somebody who has been overthinking emotion. There is a huge difference. The Hermit emerges quietly beside all of this, and the atmosphere changes immediately. The noise fades, the excuses fade, the distractions fade. This feels like a period where this person has been observing their own behavior more honestly than before. Maybe not publicly, maybe not even consciously at first, but little moments of self-awareness keep appearing. A random memory while driving, a realization during a sleepless night, a strange emotional reaction to something that shouldn't matter anymore. Except it does matter, that's the thing. It still matters. And the more they sit with themselves, the harder it becomes to deny that. Honestly, I don't feel like this person expected silence to affect them the way it has. They may have believed that distance would create clarity. Instead, distance seems to be creating awareness. The farther away things became physically, the more emotionally present they started feeling. Oh my God, that realization alone feels overwhelming. Because it challenges everything they thought they understood. They thought space would make the connection weaker. They thought time would reduce the intensity. They thought focusing elsewhere would help them move forward. Yet somehow your energy keeps appearing in places they never anticipated. Not because you're forcing yourself into their thoughts, not because they're trying to hold on to the past, but because certain emotional connections leave traces, and those traces don't disappear simply because people stop talking. The Strength card feels especially important here. Not in a dramatic way, not in a loud way, more like somebody slowly gathering the courage to face something they've avoided for a very long time. Courage isn't always action. Sometimes courage is honesty. Sometimes courage is admitting that something still affects you. Sometimes courage is acknowledging that pride has been speaking louder than the heart. That's what I keep feeling. There has been a battle between fear and truth, between avoidance and acceptance, between what feels comfortable and what feels real. And little by little, the truth seems to be gaining ground. Not all at once, not through some sudden revelation, more like a gradual unraveling, a gradual understanding, a gradual recognition that no matter how much distance exists, the emotional attachment remains present. Because the heart doesn't always follow the rules the mind creates for it. And sitting underneath all of this reflection is a growing awareness that some of the choices made along the way may have been influenced by something much deeper than circumstances alone. A pattern keeps appearing here, and honestly, it feels like something this person spent a very long time refusing to look at directly. Not because they couldn't see it, more because seeing it would require them to acknowledge how much of their current situation no longer fits who they are becoming. The Devil arrives, and immediately the energy feels heavier. Not necessarily dark, just heavy. Heavy with obligations. Heavy with habits. Heavy with attachments that may have made sense at one point but seem increasingly difficult to justify. There is somebody here who has been holding on to something long after their heart stopped believing in it. For some of you, this could be a relationship. For others, it could be a lifestyle, a social circle, a routine, or even an identity they've carried for years. Whatever it is, it feels restrictive. And the more they grow emotionally, the more uncomfortable those restrictions become. Okay, imagine trying to wear clothes that fit 10 years ago. Eventually, they become impossible to ignore. That's how this energy feels. The discomfort keeps increasing. The tension keeps building. And deep down, they know something has to change. The Seven of Swords appears beside this energy, and there is something here about avoidance. Not malicious avoidance, not necessarily manipulation. More like somebody constantly finding ways to postpone difficult truths. Telling themselves they'll deal with it later. Telling themselves they'll figure it out eventually. Telling themselves things are fine when they clearly aren't. Yeah, that kind of self-deception can only last so long. Because reality has a way of showing up no matter how hard someone tries to outrun it. And honestly, I feel like this person is becoming exhausted from maintaining versions of themselves that no longer feel authentic. Certain conversations feel forced. Certain relationships feel forced. Certain commitments feel forced. They've spent so much energy trying to keep everything stable that they forgot to ask themselves whether stability was actually making them happy. Oh my God! That realization alone feels heartbreaking. Because when somebody begins questioning the foundation they've built their life around, everything suddenly feels uncertain. The Five of Cups emerges and the emotional atmosphere changes again. This feels deeply personal, deeply reflective. There are moments where this person looks backward and sees things differently than they did before. Not because the past changed, because they changed. And when perspective shifts, old memories start carrying new meaning. They remember moments where they pulled away, moments where they chose distance instead of vulnerability, moments where they convinced themselves they had all the time in the world. Those memories don't feel neutral anymore. There is sadness attached to them, regret attached to them, a quiet awareness that some opportunities were not appreciated while they were present. What keeps standing out to me is that the regret isn't centered around losing control. It's centered around losing connection. That's what hurts. Because connection is difficult to replace. Real emotional understanding is difficult to replace. And the more they compare their current reality to what they shared with you, the more obvious those differences become. Some of them are beginning to understand that what they thought was freedom may have actually been avoidance. What they thought was independence may have actually been fear. And what they thought was protecting themselves may have ended up creating the very loneliness they were trying to avoid. The Tower enters this reading with an energy that cannot be ignored. Nothing about this card feels subtle here. It feels like walls cracking, beliefs cracking, assumptions cracking. Structures they trusted beginning to reveal weaknesses they never noticed before. There are truths surfacing, truths about themselves, truths about the people around them, truths about situations they've defended for far too long. Sometimes life reaches a point where maintaining the illusion becomes harder than facing reality. That's exactly what this feels like. The old explanations aren't working anymore. The old excuses aren't working anymore. The old justifications aren't working anymore. And as those foundations begin collapsing, this person is left standing face to face with something they have avoided for a very long time. The realization that certain things they fought to preserve were never as valuable as they believed, while something truly meaningful slowly drifted farther away. That awareness isn't arriving all at once. It's unfolding layer by layer, and with every layer that falls away, they're beginning to recognize who and what actually mattered beneath all the noise. Something feels different here. Not chaotic, not confusing, just unmistakably clear in a way that wasn't available before. It's almost as if a fog that lingered for a very long time has started lifting, and what remains is impossible to ignore. The Judgment card comes forward with an energy that feels deeply personal. This isn't somebody being forced to look at their life. This feels more like somebody finally becoming willing to do it. There is a huge difference. Because when people resist self-reflection, every answer feels hidden. When they become open to it, truths begin appearing everywhere. And honestly, that's exactly what seems to be happening. Little things that once felt insignificant suddenly carry meaning. Old conversations return to their mind. Certain moments replay with surprising clarity. Pieces that never seemed connected are beginning to form a much larger picture. Okay, for a long time, I think this person focused on external circumstances. What happened? Who said what? What went wrong? What couldn't be controlled? But the energy feels different now. The attention is turning inward. They're starting to ask themselves deeper questions. Questions that don't have easy answers. Questions that require honesty. Questions that require accountability. And once those questions begin appearing, it becomes difficult to return to old patterns of thinking. The Ace of Swords feels incredibly powerful here because there is a sharpness entering their perspective, not harshness, clarity. The kind of clarity that arrives after confusion has exhausted itself. The kind of clarity that appears after someone has spent enough time pretending not to know what their heart already understands. Yeah, this feels like somebody recognizing that certain truths have been present all along. They simply weren't ready to accept them. One of those truths seems connected to you. Not necessarily because you're perfect, not because the connection was flawless, but because what existed between you carried a depth that proved difficult to replicate elsewhere. Oh my God! The realization doesn't seem to be centered around idealizing you. It's centered around understanding the rarity of what was shared. That's different, because idealization fades. Fantasy fades, reality remains. And the reality they're confronting is that your presence affected them in ways they didn't fully appreciate while they had access to it. The King of Cups appears, and the emotional atmosphere becomes much softer, more mature, more grounded. I don't feel the same resistance that appeared earlier in the reading. There is less defensiveness, less avoidance, less need to explain everything away. Instead, I feel somebody becoming increasingly comfortable with their own emotions. Not completely comfortable, but more willing to acknowledge them. And that matters, because emotional honesty changes everything. The more honest they become with themselves, the more difficult it becomes to dismiss what they're feeling. There is a tenderness surrounding this energy, a recognition that vulnerability is not weakness, a recognition that caring deeply about someone does not diminish their strength. For a long time, this person may have viewed emotional openness as something risky, something that created exposure, something that handed power away. That perspective feels like it's shifting, because they are beginning to understand that emotional connection isn't about winning or losing. It's about sharing. It's about trust. It's about allowing another person to genuinely matter. The star appears again, and I have to be honest, every time this card enters the reading, your energy becomes impossible to overlook. Not in an obsessive way, not in a dramatic way, more like a light that continues shining regardless of distance, regardless of silence, regardless of time. There is something about your presence that remained with them even when they tried focusing elsewhere. And that persistence has forced them to reconsider the nature of this connection. Because ordinary connections don't tend to leave this kind of impact. Ordinary connections don't continue influencing somebody long after physical distance appears. Ordinary connections don't create this level of introspection. The more they reflect, the more they understand that what they experienced with you was never as simple as they originally believed. There was meaning there. There was growth there. There was something valuable there. And perhaps the most difficult realization of all is recognizing how much of that value was only fully understood after it became less accessible. That awareness seems to be opening a door inside of them, a door that has remained closed for a very long time. Because once somebody truly sees what matters, another question naturally begins forming. Not about the past, not about blame, not about regret, but about whether certain things deserve another chance to be approached differently than before. A sense of urgency is quietly building beneath the surface here. Not panic, not pressure, just the awareness that some opportunities don't remain frozen in time forever. Life keeps moving, people keep growing, and something inside this person seems increasingly aware of that reality. The Eight of Wands arrives with an energy that feels impossible to ignore. For so long, this reading has carried themes of reflection, hesitation, and emotional processing. What feels different here is movement, not rushed movement, not reckless movement, just movement, the kind that begins after somebody has spent enough time sitting with their own truth. Because there comes a moment when thinking can no longer replace action. There comes a moment when understanding something emotionally creates a desire to express it. And honestly, that's what this energy feels like. There are thoughts they haven't shared, words they haven't spoken, feelings they've carried privately, yet the weight of keeping everything inside seems heavier than before. Okay, imagine carrying a letter around for months, reading it over and over, rewriting certain parts, wondering whether to send it, wondering what might happen if you do. Eventually, the question stops being whether the message matters. The question becomes whether you're willing to keep holding on to it. That's the feeling surrounding this person. Something wants to be expressed. Something wants to move. Something wants to cross the distance that has existed for far too long. The Knight of Cups steps forward, and the emotional tone becomes softer again, more open, more sincere. I don't feel somebody trying to impress you. I don't feel somebody trying to control the narrative. What I feel is somebody becoming increasingly honest with themselves about what they truly want. And that's important, because there is a huge difference between wanting attention and wanting connection. Attention is temporary. Connection carries depth. Connection requires vulnerability. Connection requires courage. This person seems to be understanding that. The image that keeps coming to mind is someone standing outside their own emotional walls after spending years living behind them. Not quite ready to tear everything down, but no longer comfortable hiding there either. Yeah, that feels accurate. There is a growing willingness to be seen. A growing willingness to admit that your presence still matters. A growing willingness to acknowledge that losing touch with someone meaningful affects the heart differently than expected. Oh my God! One of the strongest energies here is the realization that life continued moving while they were trying to figure everything out. And because life moves forward, there is also an awareness that you are moving forward too. That seems significant, not because they want to stop your growth, not because they expect you to wait, but because they understand that every day creates new experiences, new perspectives, and new possibilities. The chariot appears, and immediately I feel determination entering the reading. Not determination fueled by fear, determination fueled by clarity. That's a very different energy. Fear creates reaction, clarity creates intention. This person appears to be reaching a place where they are becoming more intentional about what deserves their energy, more intentional about what deserves their attention, more intentional about who deserves a place in their emotional world, and every path seems to keep leading back toward the same realization. Some connections leave an imprint that remains long after distance enters the picture. Some people continue occupying space in the heart, regardless of circumstances. The Lovers arrives with a presence that feels deeply meaningful. Not dramatic, not overwhelming, just honest. This card feels like somebody finally recognizing the importance of a choice they once underestimated. Not because they lacked feelings before, because they lacked perspective. Perspective changes everything. When viewed through the lens of experience, certain people become easier to appreciate. Certain moments become easier to understand. Certain connections become impossible to dismiss. What keeps standing out is that this person no longer seems focused on what went wrong. Their attention appears to be shifting toward what was real, what mattered, what felt genuine, what continued surviving despite silence, despite distance, despite all the reasons things could have faded away. There is something beautiful about that realization. Because when somebody stops arguing with their own heart, they begin hearing it more clearly. And as that clarity deepens, another layer of understanding starts emerging. An understanding that meaningful connections aren't measured solely by how they begin or even by the challenges they face, but by the way they continue living inside us long after we thought the story had reached its final chapter. One thing that keeps standing out to me is that genuine connections have a way of teaching us something about ourselves. Sometimes they bring comfort, sometimes they bring growth, sometimes they help us see parts of our heart that we didn't fully understand before. Whatever role this connection plays in your story, I hope this reading gave you a little clarity, a little comfort, and maybe even a reminder to trust your own intuition. Because at the end of the day, nobody knows your journey better than you do. Thank you for allowing me to spend this time with you. I always appreciate sharing these moments together. That's all I've got for you for this reading. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. I really appreciate it. You all mean a lot, and I'll catch you in the next one. Take care. Okay.